Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for Site Suitability Made Easy. My name is Stacey McBride, and I'm Director of Marketing at Pivot. Today, I'm here with Rich Henry, our Director of Customer Success. He oversees our client onboarding, implementation, and customer support programs. And I like to say Rich is every customer's best friend because he finds unique solutions for all of the different needs that you guys have. We're going to talk today in our demo about Pivot, about how we not only identify sites faster than any other siting solution, but how we also help engineering teams by providing more comprehensive data than anybody else. Rich is going to walk you through a demonstration, but I'm going to kick us off with a couple of little slides about Pivot. So first up, who is Pivot? We streamline energy projects with location intelligence, and we do that by providing software for solar and wind generation siting, power transmission corridor routing, and environmental impact analytics from your desktop. We're going to discuss how Pivot not only helps identify sites faster for developers, but how we help pre-construction and engineering teams save time when analyzing suitability. We're able to support customers in engineering and pre-construction because we're a team of data nerds and software geeks who have actually worked inside of engineering for all of our careers. We've been slicing and dicing data to solve problems in the energy sector for a really long time. And recently, our subject matter expertise grew exponentially. We were acquired earlier this year by Terracon, and we can now inject 50 years of Terracon's geotechnical and environmental data into our software, delivering a solution that's not only fast, but purpose-built and backed by expert-level data. So what are you going to learn today? Today, we're going to walk you through a workflow that will significantly reduce the time you spend on site prospecting, and will take you from knowing very little about a site to understanding usable area in minutes. We're going to showcase the unique data layers that only Pivot has to give you a more complete picture of a site. And we're going to help you prioritize sites so you can turn them over to engineers, and in turn, only send field crews out for site investigations when you have a lot of confidence in what you're going to find. And we do it all in a workflow that is streamlined for your prospecting. It's not for GIS people or analysts, although they can use it too, but really with developers, the folks who are prospecting, pre-construction folks in mind. Before we get into the software, I'd like to take a quick moment to talk about our data. At Pivot, we've curated hundreds of data sources into a single database, and we keep it up to date and accurate so that you don't have to go out and collect all this information from all these various places. A lot of this information here is publicly available. However, we also include premium data sets such as property parcels and infrastructure information, including substations and transmission lines. Additionally, Pivot provides enhanced data sets, those expert level data sets that you need to support that engineering analysis. This includes things like our enhanced smart parcels, which Rich will explain to you all in a little bit. Social vulnerability data to understand what's going on in an area from an environmental and social justice perspective. Weather data, LIDAR information, and hydric soils. With all this data in mind, we're going to turn things over to Rich, and he's going to share with us how our software pulls this data in and displays back results quickly to support your development from site prospecting through engineering.
Thank you, Stacey. It's good to have you here. To kind of get things started here, let's just talk about the intent of the conversation, right? The intent here is to really introduce you all to Pivot, give you a brief introduction to what siting is about. So there's lots of details here where it would be really great to have an opportunity to sit with you all one-on-one to understand your use cases. As we jump into the application, right, we're in siting, and primarily siting was designed early on to kind of support prospecting opportunities and understanding usable area. And granted that focus has changed over time, but we're going to kind of start out with that prospecting workflow. So to get us started, we're going to go ahead and search for an opportunity here in Brunswick County, here in Virginia. Now, we could have just as easily, in terms of prospecting, right? There's lots of opportunities here within the platform, how you want to enter your enter the platform and begin your sort of prospecting or identifying your sites. We could have just as easily dropped a point on the map and searched within proximity of that location. We could have just simply clicked on the parcels that we want to add to our projects, or upload sites from a KMZ, or even start to leverage some of the existing infrastructure. So for example, these power lines and these little yellow dots that represent the substations, of which we have coverage for the entire United States. We could have clicked on those and used them as our kind of our starting point, right, to start searching within proximity of each of those structures. But again, in our case, we're going to go ahead and start prospecting inside Brunswick County, Virginia, which is going to open up our siting criteria panel over here on the left-hand side. So one of the first options we have here is to choose between various parcel types, which might be kind of unusual in some of the applications or workflows that you've seen. And that's because, we think of data in a few different ways. One of which is what Stacy talked about earlier when she showed you that slide, which is all of that information from hundreds of different agencies that we've been curating over the years, and that we're also responsible for keeping up to date, okay? And just to give you kind of a sense of when we're updating this type of information, it generally is anywhere between 30 and 90 days, depending on, whether it's a federal level data set, state, or county. With that said, right, the second way that we think about data is not actually our data, but your data. So the information that you can upload into your account and made available inside the platform, leverage it inside the citing application to help your citing workflow. And then the last way we think about it is enhanced data, right? Stacy alluded to this earlier, and smart parcels represents an example of that enhanced data set. So to kind of step backwards in order to explain what a smart parcel is, let's talk about what tax map parcels are, which is the parcel data that you all are downloading now, maybe from the local or from the county GIS site, or maybe you're purchasing from one of the parcel vendors, right? Whereas with smart parcels, what we've done is we've taken our parcel database, which we have for the entire United States, and each time we update that information, which is roughly every 45 days, we're going to run an algorithm on top of that, which is going to aggregate tax map parcels that are adjacent to each other that have the same landowner information, which is ideal for some of these larger utility scale solar opportunities and also some of the wind farm opportunities that we're seeing. All right, as we continue to move down the siting criteria panel, you can see that we can also go prospecting for a particular landowner that exists in your area of interest. My example, it's the county. And then as we continue to scroll down, we'll start to configure some of the limits on the acreage that we're looking for. And I'm going to search for opportunities that are 300 acres or larger. My scenario here is that I'm looking to develop roughly a 35 megawatt project, which would put us somewhere around 245 acres. So I'm going to start a little bit high and kind of work my way backwards. And then I'm going to go ahead and disable this next option here, which just puts a limit on that parcel size. And then I'm going to go ahead and disable this because I want to focus on opportunities that are within 1 mile of a substation. And you can see that we can continue to refine these filters here based on the substation capacity. We're just going to go ahead and leave it as is. And then I'm going to also disable this option here to find opportunities near power lines. All right, so now we can quickly see that we've pulled back 20 records, which is really fun for us, particularly our software team, because they work really hard to make sure that this application is performant. So really what's happened here is we've gone from 150 million parcels that we have inside our database down to 20 records, right? And if I wasn't sitting here yapping to you all, you could get this done in roughly 60 seconds, okay? So something we're proud of and something that you all need, right? We have a lot of solar developers on the call. We have a lot of solar developer customers with Pivot right now, and it's a very competitive environment, and so speed is really important. All right. Let's take a look at some of our sites here. And what I'd like to do now is just walk through some of the features that allow us to do kind of a desktop review, right? That high-level cursory review before we really jump into any particular sites. And so I'm going to go ahead and zoom to one of our opportunities here and switch over to the satellite imagery. And then from here, what we can do is start to leverage some of the data layers that we have, right? So if I come over here, this is a list of all of the pivot layers that Stacy showed you just a few minutes ago on that slide. So we can turn on things like existing pipelines to see if we have any in the area. And as we scroll down here, we can start to turn on the floodplain data. And you can notice up here in that northern portion of this particular site that we can see a floodplain record. And as we continue to scroll down, we can turn on things like NWI wetlands and water bodies and flow lines and so on and so forth. All right, so you can quickly have access to this information, of course, across the entire United States so that you can conduct that desktop review. Along with that, right, it's interesting to start to see pictures here or things on the map, But if I come in here and click on the map, we'll just give that a few seconds to pull back these search results. What we're going to see is we're going to also pull back some of the other data from more of a tabular perspective. All right. So, in some scenarios and some applications, you have to actually go in and say, hey, I'm interested in seeing floodplains, or, I want to be able to click on this and pull back the depth of bedrock information. The way that we designed our application allows you to click in a single location, and it's going to pull back everything that we have for that particular spot. All right. So we can paint that greater picture here. So, for example, now we can start to see, who are the electrical retail service territories that we're working in. We can get information about that floodplain record. And then as we scroll down, right, we can see information about the geotechnical characteristics of that area. And if we wanted to learn a little bit more, we could expand this and see some of the detailed attributes. And that goes for parcel information. So if you wanted to learn a little bit about this property owner before you took this conversation any further, you could quickly do that by just simply clicking on the map. One other tool that you have available to you to kind of conduct this desktop review is what we refer to as a parcel report. Okay, we'll give that a few seconds to run. The intent of this parcel report is to take some of that subjective information that we've been seeing on the screen here, but also tie some actual metrics to it. And so what we'll see here in just a minute is the table of contents here, which just sort of represents just the information that we have on this particular report. And I should just mention to you that this is just our default report, which means that, if you all wanted to add or remove information from this report, you can. Now, this page also kind of represents a yes/no scenario where, for example, do we have 100-year floodplain data on this particular site? We do. Do we have any endangered species? We don't. And so as we scroll through each of these pages here, for example, these next two, it's going to report to you all of the existing infrastructure that is within proximity of that particular site. As we continue to scroll down, we can actually see that floodplain record, but now we can see how many acres of that floodplain exist on that property and what's the overall impact for that for the overall site. Same sort of information here for wetlands, streams, and then as we go down a little bit further, we're going to also report back to you a slope suitability map and also a table that gives you a sense of the slope conditions on this particular site. Okay, and then this last page also will give you information about the land cover, right? So we can quickly see on this particular site that there's lots of forested areas, and that alone right there may be a go no go, right, for this particular site. And again, minus all the talking, right? You could have created that site, run your siting criteria, evaluated this site, run that parcel report within minutes, and you could have decided whether you want to spend time or energy investigating that site any further. Okay. What we're going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and add this site to my project, and I'm going to scroll down because there's one other that I want to add to our project to help facilitate our conversation today. All right. So we're going to switch over to our project sites tab. And in doing so, a couple things have actually happened here. By adding these sites to this project, it means that we can start collaborating on this project. All right, so collaboration has been one of our cornerstone elements inside our platform since the very beginning. For example, we have modules in the platform that actually allow you to build custom web mapping experiences that allow you to pull people in from inside your organization or outside your organization to collaborate on a project. And we want to propagate that collaborative experience throughout all of our modules, of course, including citing. And so to build on that, right, we have the capability to come in here and rank these sites. We can actually add individual comments for those particular sites. And then recently we included the ability to come over here and add project comments. And so if you have 2 or 3 or 4 people that are working on this particular project, you all can kind of keep track of any sort of activity and have that all associated with the project, as opposed to kind of pulling in outside resources, maybe like, chatting via Teams or something of that nature. Okay. As we continue to kind of scroll over in this panel down below, you'll start to see information about how close is the closest infrastructure, right? Power lines and substations to this particular site. You'll also notice this site location column that has a bunch of little tools in it. We're going to actually come back to that in a little bit. What I want to draw your attention to now is this usable acreage column, which is currently blank. All right, so in our workflow, this will be our next step. So we're going to jump over here to the usable area criteria, which is going to expose all of the different constraints that we have built into the application. And from here, you can actually toggle on and off these setbacks depending on whatever the scenario is, what part of the country you're working in, what are the particular project requirements. And then you can also come over here and customize the setbacks for each of these. And this is really nice in terms of being able to configure the usable area for all of your sites, whether you're doing 2 sites or whether you're doing 50 sites. But in a little bit, what we're going to do is start walking through kind of individual scenarios for each of these sites. So you can come over here and start modifying these on a kind of a one site per site basis. As we continue to scroll down through the usable area criteria panel, you'll also notice these little icons next to land cover and slope. We do treat them a little bit differently in the sense that you can come in and start customizing how you want to treat a specific, in this example, land cover subtype. We're going to actually come back to this and play around in just a few minutes. And then the next option here for slope, very similar to what we just saw with land cover, right? So currently the default configuration is anything between 0 and 10% is considered usable. Of course, if you want to modify that, you certainly can. So we're going to go ahead and kick that off. You can watch it calculate over here. It'll be done in just a few seconds. But while that's calculating, I want to talk about high resolution slope here. By default, we're using the USGS 10-meter, slope information, which is available virtually in all applications that you're using because it is so readily available. And it's also at a kind of granularity that allows you to, download that information easily and use it. So what we've recently added here, and this feature here, the high resolution slope feature, is a direct result of talking and having conversations with our customers, but also having conversations with folks here at Terracon, right? These Terracon has, like Stacy mentioned, 50 years of experience on and below the surface, and so they really understand, these types of this type of data. And because of those conversations, we've learned that the granularity of that default slope information is just not good enough, particularly for some of our engineering and design customers, where they need to pull that information and be able to conduct, certain type of analysis like a gradient analysis, right? That default information is just too not coarse enough to be able to facilitate that. But this high resolution slope feature also just represents an opportunity for Pivot where, we continue to want to evolve the siting platform to be able to not only satisfy the needs of our solar developers, but also start to satisfy the needs of some of our other stakeholders. Again, for example, our designers or engineers or those folks that are conducting that micrositing. Another really good example of this while we're here is recently we had conversations with one of our customers, there's actually multiple customers, where the conversation came up about the ability to kind of ensure the insurability of a site, particularly as it relates to weather events. And so we recently added hail events, frequency of hail events, tornado events, wind events, and also lightning strikes to help support those stakeholders as well. And, again, we'll say this several times here, but we are really working to paint a much bigger and more complete picture of this site earlier in the process to avoid any challenges you might face later. Okay, the usable area has completed calculating, and you can see here that it's not looking all that great, particularly as it relates to my project where I need something in the neighborhood of 245 acres, which is absolutely by design because I want to use that as an opportunity to kind of talk about some of the features we have inside the application. So we're going to go ahead and start again with this site that we've been looking at. I'm going to come in here and just turn off a few of these layers so it's just not quite so busy. Okay, let's investigate these sites a little bit further. You'll notice here with the usable area, that calculation is done. It's not looking real good for our sites. In one example, we have 0 usable area, and the other, we're well shy of that 245 acres that we're kind of aiming for this particular project. And that is absolutely by design because we'll use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the other features we have in the application. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll over here and draw your attention to all of these columns over here on the right-hand side, which represent the individual constraints that we take into account when we calculate that usable area. So for example, here, if I go ahead and map this feature here, you can see 13% of this entire site is based on that site boundary setback, and we can see that. Okay, so this one's not all exciting. It's absolutely to be expected, right? So as we move over here to the streams, right, we can start to see how the streams are impacting this site. We'll continue to move down the line here, and we can start to see how the wetlands are impacting this site. So now we can actually start interrogating these individual constraints one by one to start to get a sense of, how and why and where they're impacting a particular site. Same goes for floodplains up here. So this particular portion of the site is, not all that viable. But we still haven't found that one feature that is really, really heavily impacting the overall usable area for this site until we come down here to land cover. And just looking at the satellite imagery, that's no surprise, particularly because we're working in Virginia where it's very forested. But again, I want to use this as an opportunity because maybe this particular landowner is fine with chopping down these trees and taking that timber revenue and then start leasing their property for solar. All right, so what we're going to do is come over here to our land cover settings, and we're going to grab each of the forest subtypes, and we'll go ahead and move them over to the left, which means that we're going to treat them as usable area. We'll go ahead and click OK, and then I'm going to scroll back over here so we can watch the usable area acreage over here update as we run it for both sites. So we'll give that just a few seconds to run, and you can quickly see now that we're starting to increase our usable area, particularly on this site that we're looking at, right? We've gone from 0 now to 175, okay? All right, so let's kind of take this conversation a little bit further. Let's take this site, I should say. Let's take this site a little bit further. So we have right now 175 acres of usable area, which is, as I mentioned, is shy of that 240 acres we're trying to achieve. And so we're going to go ahead and use this as an opportunity to talk about how we could actually make this site grow. All right, so what we're going to do is come down here and edit this site. And as you look at this polygon now, right, you can see that we've got this dark magenta line in here. And if you recall from our conversation earlier about smart parcels, right, smart parcels are made up of many tax map parcels that are adjacent to each other with that same landowner information. This represents one of those smart parcels. And based on the research of looking at those individual constraints, we now understand that this area up here, because of the floodplain activity, because of the wetlands, is not very viable. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and remove that section out of our site. And then we're going to come down here and go ahead and add some of these adjacent properties to our site. We'll go ahead and click Save here. And we'll go ahead and just run the usable area for this individual site. And now you can see, now we're up to, just over 290 acres for this particular location. We'll just go ahead and map that usable area so you can see it. And of course, if we scrolled over to the right, we'd see a pretty dramatic change in that land cover percentage. Okay, let's shift gears here and take a look at another site, and we'll use this other site as a way to just bring up another topic about some of the data layers that were included in our database. In fact, let me go ahead and we'll just map the usable area so we can start to kind of start the conversation from there. All right. So we've talked about some of the enhanced data sets, right? For example, the smart parcels, and earlier on we talked about that high resolution slope information. Also mentioned, reaching out to various stakeholders, including those that are, responsible for understanding the insurability of a site. So we recently added that weather information. Another example here that we want to talk about, again, is based on conversations that we've had with our customers and also conversations that we've had internally with some of our Terracon experts, which is around wetland information. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and actually map the wetland setback for this particular area, and we'll come over here and turn on the NWI wetland so we can just see that. And so based on these conversations that we've had with some of our customers, it has become very apparent to us that although the NWI wetland information is very helpful, particularly at that kind of high-level cursory review of the data, it doesn't really paint a complete picture in terms of the hydro conditions of the soil. All right, so as a result of that, we've recently added the hydric soil information. So let me go ahead and expand that. You can take a look at that legend, and we'll go ahead and turn on the layer. And as we can quickly see, right, this area has a fairly good coverage of hydric conditions, and it looks like, based on that legend, anywhere between 26 and 75%, which could be again, one of those kind of no-go situations, right? If nothing else, it's an opportunity to sort of raise your hand and have a conversation with some of the other stakeholders to determine whether you want to pursue this site or not. And again, this is, the intent here is, how Pivot is thinking about telling the siting story, which is to try to expose as much relevant information early in the process, so that you don't spend time unnecessarily on some sites, right? So as you recall, when we first conducted our search results and we had those 2 sites and we were conducting that desktop review, we could have just as easily turned on the hydric soils layer for these particular sites, and then we could have at that point decided whether we want to pursue it or not. And the other important piece here is, it's interesting to be able to see this information on the map, to be able to get those, early warnings as soon as you can. But the story doesn't end there, right? When we talk about, engaging with our engineers and our designers, right, there's going to have to be a data handoff at some point. All right. So what we're going to do for the last few minutes of the demonstration is just talk about some of that data or deliverables that are being produced for each of our projects. Okay. So one of the first ones I'd like to talk about is a permit report. Right. So we're going to go ahead and come up here and take a look at this permitting punch list. The intent here is to share with you all, for each of the sites, any of the common federal level permits that you might encounter, and then flag those particular permits to let you know whether they've been triggered or not, identify the data set that's triggered that particular permit. And then as we scroll down a little bit further here, we're going to actually provide a definition of that statute or regulation, and then we're going to rack out the individual features that are a part of that particular permit. Again, same story. We're trying to give you information as early as possible and as quick as possible that may represent, a challenge for this particular site. All right. With that said, as you will recall earlier, we reviewed that parcel report. That parcel report is sometimes we've nicknamed it the kitchen table report, right? So when we think about it sometimes as folks sitting around the table, maybe they're internal stakeholders that are looking at this PDF, evaluating that site, having a conversation about that site without necessarily having to come into the application. And depending on, where you are in conversations with your landowners, right, you might actually decide to share that parcel report with them so they can understand what's happening on their property and what is the plan for their property, right? So you can have that sort of, another level of engagement with those landowners. And while we're talking about landowners, as part of the deliverables for each of these projects, we'll produce this contact list, which is really here to support, reaching out and sending mailers to those particular landowners to start engaging in that conversation. And of course, this list is going to include information like the owner name and the owner address, and also some of the situs information as well. But we're going to also append or associate a screenshot with each of these records. And so when you generate this contact list, in the background, we're going to generate these screenshots that show you the satellite imagery as well as the boundary for each of these locations. And we'll associate that image file with each of these records. So if you have some of those mail merge applications that allow you to integrate those images into your mailers, it's built for that. And then the next piece of information I want to share with you is, the classic KMZ output, right? Everybody really wants to be able to have the KMZ output because it is so shareable, right? It's something that anybody knows how to use at this point. But the other use case for this that we're finding with many of our customers is that they're taking either the usable area, which I'll go ahead and turn that on, they'll take this usable area or the constrained areas and import that information into some of those niche applications that allow you to start identifying where you're going to rack out those arrays on a particular piece of property. So what we're seeing right now is that usable area. This next feature here will show you the actual constrained area. And then as you recall in our conversations, the ability to investigate those individual constraints, we can come down here and turn on those features as well. Okay. This is really great. The KMZ is very helpful, but what you'll notice here is that it doesn't contain the floodplains. It doesn't contain, some of the property parcels or the hydric soils or the depth to bedrock, right? And so let me jump back to our siting application here. This icon over here will generate your data package, and this data package is going to be, for you data nerds, is going to contain all of that GIS information, all of that spatial data that is being created to support each of these sites. So that's going to be, we're going to export that out to a file geodatabase, so it can be consumed by virtually any GIS application out there, or GIS software, as well as AutoCAD. It's going to contain that file geodatabase with feature classes that represent all of the data that we have inside our Pivot database. Again, hydric soils, depth to bedrock, floodplains. To take that a step further, we're going to also create these raster surfaces. So earlier, you will recall the conversation we were having about slope and high resolution slope. Of course, that information is stored as raster data. And so what we're going to do for each of our sites is we're going to create a raster file for slope information, elevation information, and also aspect. So you can pull all of that data in to support some of your ancillary workflows. And of course, as part of that data package, we're going to include all the information about the site itself, meaning the site boundary, the constrained area, the usable area, and also those individual constraints. Now, again, the spatial data is really great. You're going to have folks on your team that are going to actually want to see some of this information in more of a tabular format. And so we can also produce our online reporting. And so over here on the top left represents where you can click on the individual sites. Right now I have 2 sites chosen, and you can see as I choose, or as I check those sites, I can start to kind of rack them out next to each other so I can conduct that sort of side-by-side experience. And then the intent of this report here is it's really an impact report, right? So we're taking your site boundaries, sending that to the Pivot database, and basically reporting everything that sticks, right? So for example, here in this first site, we can see that 18.39 acres, which is the entire site, falls in this moderate depth to bedrock category, right? As opposed to this next site over here, the Economic Development Authority site, you can see that the majority of the acreage falls into this shallow category. Again, if you produce this report, you share it with others, that right there might be a red flag for you in terms of the constructability of that site. Okay, so depth to bedrock is just one example. There are several other examples or other data sets, of course, that support kind of information from a geotechnical perspective. That's going to include things like that hydric soils, the geologic units, karst topography, fault line information, et cetera. Also, as part of this report, of course, you're going to get some of that environmental information. You'll also get some of the jurisdiction and boundary data. And as Stacy mentioned earlier, we'll have some of that socioeconomic, social vulnerability data, and also some of that information around the environmental justice for these particular sites, which is becoming more and more important as you consider a particular site. And of course, this summary report here can be exported out to a spreadsheet. And then down here in the bottom left, these are the detail tables. This is where you can really dive into the details. You'll also get information here around the particular agencies that this information is coming from, and also its published date. So as you consider building some of your reports, you might need to provide some of that metadata. Okay, I'm going to jump back to citing. That really does conclude the demonstration portion of our conversation. And before I hand it back over to Stacy, I just want to comment that we have of course covered a lot of ground here, which includes topics like prospecting for sites and conducting that desktop review, calculating and customizing that usable area. All the while, we're considering how we can review these sites with a much more comprehensive lens, right? Thinking in terms of how how our software and our data can kind of paint a more complete picture earlier in that site development with the intent to identify more qualified sites, but also, and maybe more importantly, avoid spending too much time on bad sites. I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to you, Stacy.
Thank you, Rich. Thanks for the demonstration and sharing all that information. As he mentioned, we covered a lot of ground today. In addition to helping you all get more information sooner with high resolution LiDAR data, hydric soils information, and enhanced parcels, we talked about the speed of delivery, collaborating within our software and outside of our software with your project stakeholders. At Pivot, we continue to add new features and information. We release enhancements every 2 weeks. And right now we're looking at how we can further integrate Terracon's 50 years of subsurface and surface characteristics into our software. With literally millions of boring sites and thousands of experts at our fingertips, we're now able to provide information that just simply isn't available from any other software vendor. At the end of the day, we know you're all racing to find the best sites for new projects. And the other software solutions on the market just can't move as quickly and can't provide the depth of data that Pivot has. As you all grow and evolve in the industry, we're growing right alongside of you and will continue to add data and expertise that you won't be able to get anywhere else. We'd love to talk more about our software, our data, and our future roadmap. Please visit our website at pivot.com and sign up to have a personal demo. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to Rich for our presenter. And please keep an email out so you can share this information with your colleagues and take a survey about this presentation. Have a wonderful day.